All right, now is the time for public comments, and so if you would like to make a comment, please approach the microphone.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, members, Jeff Frost representing the California Association of Suburban School Districts, and on the transportation issue, the California School Boards Association. We wanted to thank the LAO for the work they did on this report. It does sunshine an issue that you've been grappling with not only last year in the LCFF, but for 2 or 3 years since before either of you were in the legislature, a prior legislature eliminated the program, and then a year later, the legislature came back and unanimously put the program back in. It's clearly an important program, and we think that it has that there is reason to create an equalization program within the transportation program. We are supporting Senate Bill 1137, which Ms. Torres has introduced. There's quite a large coalition of organizations that are supporting that bill. We think it's an equity issue that should ride along with the LCFF. The whole point of the LCFF was to deal with inequities, and there is clear inequities in the home-to-school transportation program. Ms. Torres' bill is sort of a modified version of the LAO's recommendation number 3, and we'd like to continue to work with the committee as we move forward on this issue and as we get to the May revise, because it's all about whether there's money to fund any type of increase. So thank you very much.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Ray. I'm with West County Transportation Agency. We're a joint powers agreement of 16 school districts in Sonoma County, but I'm also with the California Association of School Transportation Officials and with the School Transportation Coalition. And as you heard today, the LAO did a wonderful job on this report. They reached out to school districts all over the state, large, small, rural, urban, and they identified, the disproportionate aspect of school transportation funding and the fact that it was frozen in time back in the early 1980s. And that's really what we've been dealing with all along. We've always referred to school transportation as the poster child of categorical programs, because the elements that drive school transportation are not the same ones that drive the LCFF. It's not necessarily based on ADA, not necessarily based on students requiring free or reduced price lunches, nor English language learners. So that being said, even though the LAO pointed out that costs in most school districts are below a certain percentage, it's very disproportionate among those across the state. And we think that going forward, there should be a recognition of those things, because the legislature wanted to see something that would cure and solve that disproportionate problem with pupil transportation. And we also support SB 1137. And we look at that as being one of the ways to account for addressing the disproportionate funding, but also allowing school districts, well, actually restricting school districts in the sense that they would need to be as efficient as they possibly could. One other element that wasn't real forcefully addressed in the LAO's report was that of joint powers agreements. There are only 8 school transportation joint powers agreements in the state that receive funding separately. In my case, 16 school districts are part of our JPA. And it makes sense from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint going forward to have cooperative organizations like ours. And the legislature was just going to fund school transportation joint powers agreements for this school year and the following school year. And we would urge that funding would continue for joint powers agreements as an incentive for efficiency moving forward. So thank you very much.
Assemblymember Mersucci, thank you for holding this hearing here today. Michael Holzheiser here on behalf of the Kern County Superintendent of Schools. And specifically, I want to speak to the transportation issue. First of all, we want to thank the LAO for a very fine report, but really before that, we should really go back and thank this committee and the Assembly Ed Committee from last year, because it was the discussions around transportation in the context of LCFF that brought about the need for this study. And frankly, the results of the study bear out what many of us were saying, actually what the chair of this committee, Assemblymember Bonilla, was saying last year, and Ms. Buchanan as well, that frankly, transportation is a perfect example of disproportionate cost drivers. School districts, some school districts in the state bus no students, and then there are districts in this state that bus 80 and 90%. And that disproportionate cost driver, which is the problem is compounded by the fact that you've frozen that funding for 30 years, and so you just have terrible inequities in funding. And so just as we need, through the LCFF, to fund poor and foster youth and all students proportionally to where they are in districts, we need to do that in transportation too. And so for that reason, we would also endorse the solutions around what the LAO is proposing in solution number 3. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tristan Brown with California School Employees Association. Thank you for giving us this opportunity, and we'd also like to thank the LAO for putting together an account of the history behind the program, the transportation program. We also would like to reiterate that this issue was discussed at length last year between the legislature and the administration, and was agreed to have the program remain as an add-on to LCFF, and that we would like to also voice our support for SB 1137 by Senator Torres. It will bring the reimbursement up to 50% for these districts to go towards these transportation costs over a period of years, but also include a cost of living adjustment for future expenses. And so we'd like to, again, voice our support for that, and thank you once again this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Sarah Botches with the California Association of School Business Officials, also here in support of recognizing home-to-school transportation costs. It has been a long-standing priority for our organization to recognize the need for an equitable allocation formula that clearly recognizes all the costs to all the school districts, not just those in the current funding formula. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Steve Ward, Legislative Analyst for Clovis Unified School District. I just want to quickly address 3 things that have come up today. We are very thankful for the local control funding formula and the local control aspect of that. With that, districts have more freedom, but now more responsibility. And I believe some of the questions that you brought forward today through the District Advisory Parent Committee can be addressed. Those committees are being very well educated by various organizations around the state, and there's a process by which they can request data or information, and through the comment period and the comments that the superintendents have to give back to those advisory committees, I think a lot of many of your concerns could be addressed through that vehicle. Also, we are not in favor of the continuous apportionment. We believe that limits the flexibility to address future needs or unforeseen circumstances. One could be CalSTRS and CalPERS. How is that problem going to be addressed? And if you have a continuous defined apportionment, that might limit the solutions that we could use for that. And finally, Clovis Unified supports option 3 or some variation of that for transportation. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Lucia with the Ed Voice, and wanted to mention on a couple of the points of topics for today. On the LCFF, there was a lot of conversation about transparency and wanting to know whether something could or couldn't be done. The reality is certain things were done, and you're aware of that, and there are questions that are unanswered. So we think that it's absolutely appropriate for you to consider budget bill language or trailer bill language to clarify those points, so that when it's ambiguous in terms of the administration, that's the role of the legislature to set it straight and to put the specific requirements in an unambiguous way in there. I've given you a copy of language from the statute. The State Board of Education, in our view, has adopted emergency regulations that are inconsistent with the statute. As I pointed out here, the words number and concentration with regard to doing anything with respect to reporting, and that makes sense. So whether you have the number is supplement and concentration is concentration, when that number, paragraph 1, is that those are required through regulation, and the State Board has done that. Number 2, though, paragraph 2 is to authorize. And in the paragraph dealing with authorization, it only talks about the number of unduplicated students, which is a supplemental grant, not the concentration grant. So there's no explicit statutory authority to take concentration grant money and direct those in any way for school-wide or district-wide purposes, and yet that's what was adopted by OAL in the emergency rulemaking process. We're going to be testifying to this effect at the State Board of Education. Your colleagues that made comment earlier have concerns about whether or not the regulatory process is mirroring the legislative one or vice versa. If it's a good thing to do, we would recommend that the legislature bootstrap up the language to reflect what the State Board has done in a regulatory fashion. Otherwise, there clearly is opportunity for mischief and litigation that's unnecessary. If this is in fact consistent with what the legislature intended in terms of the actions of the State Board of Education, then we think the legislature should be very clear and explicit in doing that. Moving on to home-to-school transportation. In the past, historically, home-to-school transportation and voluntary TIG money had been incorporated in the charter school block grant when there was block granting of money. The LCFF kind of mirrored the block grant approach and the grade span level approach in the funding formula for charter schools. With LCFF, that was not done. As you know, home-to-school was left outside. But by not making the adjustment for charter schools, there's been additional burden on charter schools in terms of providing access, because without those funds as general purpose funds, that affects access. We think that the LAO has done a great job of looking at various options. Number 1 would work through itself if you just folded it in, but if the legislature were to decide, if your subcommittee were to go forward with either option 2 or option 3, either this year or in the future, we would recommend that you also consider the opportunity for charter schools to participate, because we do hear a lot of times where people say charters aren't interested in home-to-school transportation. That's not true, and as a matter of fact, one of the biggest concerns that communities have is the ability, particularly minority communities, have access to a charter school where more affluent families and parents and two-parent families have the opportunity to use private transportation to get there. Thank you.
Eric Premack with the Charter Schools Development Center, and I'll associate myself with his comments relative to the charter funding equity issue. In addition, we view the transportation program for the poster child of what's wrong with categorical programs. Grossly inequitable, gives the wrong incentives, it encourages consolidation of large school sites, long distant from people's homes, etc. It discourages the use of technology and other innovative approaches that are perhaps more effective and more green, depending on the population served. We think it's kind of an archaic formula that should be swept into the LCFF as the LAO suggested under option 1. We also think the same for the TIG program. That's a profoundly inequitable and archaic formula that has seemingly no rational basis and ongoing needs, and we would encourage you to schedule that one for a hearing in the future as well. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Melissa San Miguel, and I'm with the Foster Ed Initiative at the National Center for Youth Law. I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment on the LCFF, and my comments will be directed on its impact for foster youth. There are about 39,000 school-age children in foster care in California, and our state has the largest foster youth population of any state in the country. And we believe it is essential that the state have the necessary infrastructure to ensure students in foster care benefit from the LCFF. A report from West Ed released last fall shed light on how foster youth are faring in our schools. It found that foster youth are more likely to change schools, more likely than any other at-risk student to drop out, and only 58% of students in foster care graduate. Recognizing this stark reality, the LCFF contains a number of provisions aimed at improving the educational outcomes of students in foster care. First off, it includes students in foster care as a distinct subgroup in the API, so that schools and school districts are held accountable for improving their academic achievement. School districts now must also develop plans and goals and actions related to foster youth in the LCAPs, and the CDE must inform school districts which of their students are in foster care on a weekly basis. The LCFF brought about needed changes plans to improve the overall education system for foster youth, and we are appreciative of the effort that you and your staff put into making them law. It is essential now that during implementation, the state have the necessary infrastructure to provide assistance to all 58 counties and 1,000 school districts. And we think it's crucial to understand and know what is the planning that the CD is undertaking for students in foster care. To fulfill LCFF's missions, districts must do something new. They must systematically develop plans, programs, and policies on how to serve students in foster care. And we believe that a single integrated foster youth unit is needed within the CDE to ensure districts and counties receive the assistance they need. This foster youth unit should be comprised of knowledgeable data, policy, and program staff that's responsible for providing the county, districts, and overall data support to them. As we've heard earlier today, the LCFF asks for much more from the districts and the counties. Counties will continue to need policy guidance and grants management in the County Foster Youth Service Program, and this program provides education services for foster youth. And we're pleased to learn that the FYS consultant position has been filled and think sufficient staff support is needed on both policy and grants management fronts in this new LCFF framework. Districts will now need program and policy assistance to develop effective plans for foster youth that take into account their unique educational experience and the array of statutes that affect students in foster care. And both counties and districts will continue to need the data support to implement local data plans and systems. A state foster youth unit is needed so that there is the support that both the districts and the counties will need for the new responsibilities that they are assuming. And we look forward to continuing this discussion with the CDE and with your staff. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Molly Dunn, policy attorney with the Alliance for Children's Rights, and I agree with the comments of Ms. San Miguel before me. I'm here to talk about another aspect of making sure that LCFF lives up to its promise for our foster youth, and that is the need to realign the state's longstanding foster youth services program to be consistent with LCFF. There are 54 foster youth services programs operated by county offices of education throughout the state. FYS programs increase the stability of foster care placements and improve foster youth's educational outcomes. They provide tutoring, mentoring, and other services. In addition, they play a very important role in coordinating services through the school districts within the county, and in particular supporting the foster youth education liaisons that each school district has had to have for the past several years. However, foster youth services programs are going to be hampered in their ability to support districts in their LCFF efforts unless we realign the two programs. And the problem right now is that they're misaligned. The definition of foster youth is not the same in the two programs. While LCFF uses a definition that includes all foster youth, regardless of where they are placed, the FYS definition and its funding is limited to foster youth in traditional foster care. Foster youth who are placed with relatives are not eligible or funded to receive services provided by FYS programs. Because FYS programs can't serve these youth, currently only 48% of the state's foster youth benefit from foster youth services programs. This misalignment is already creating some confusion among school districts and county offices of education, and we believe that that confusion will continue until the two programs are aligned. We urge you to align the programs by changing the definition, the FYS definition of foster youth to match the LCFF definition, and by increasing funding to FYS programs so that all of California's foster youth can get the educational supports they need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susanna Niffen with Children Now. I just want to align myself with the last two speakers. Also, I just wanted to give you a sense of who these new foster youth would be if you did align the two definitions. The group that's mostly left out of FYS programs currently at the county level are foster youth who live with relatives. There's a couple reasons for this. One, when the program was started, there weren't as many children placed with relatives. We didn't at the time realize how important it was to keep youth connected to their families the way we do now. There was a lot of times youth were just placed in traditional foster homes with no thought for finding their family and trying to keep them connected. We've now realized that that's important, and the feds and the state have made it a priority to keep kids with these families, so that population has risen to about 40% of our child welfare population, which is a huge growth. So that's one reason that we feel it's so vitally necessary, is that it's a growing population, and it's a population that we've now had time to do some research on. What we found about these youth placed with relatives is that they do much better emotionally, they reconnect with their families better, they return home at higher rates. There's a lot of positive benefits. One area where they don't do any better is in education. We're not exactly sure why, but these youth still do poorly, and just as poorly, if not worse, than foster youth who are placed in traditional homes. So we would ask that the definition be realigned in order to allow counties and foster youth services programs to help these students as well. Also, Children Now just wants to mention that we are fully in support of the way the governor has funded the LCFF in the proposal, and really appreciate his continued commitment to LCFF.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Hernandez. I'm the policy coordinator for California Youth Connection. California Youth Connection has about 600 members statewide that are current and former foster youth, and they all care about LCFF. While these foster youth have grown up in systems that have sometimes failed them, their family system, the foster care system sometimes, the education system cannot be another one that continues to fail our members and foster youth across the state. Getting a valuable education is sometimes the only salvation that these foster youth have. We are encouraged by the steps that the way LCFF is going, and we would like to encourage the state to provide more guidance for the districts regarding foster youth. We understand it's a smaller population. When one of our members approached their district about what they're doing to support foster youth, the district informed them that technically they could allocate 1% of the LCFF funds for foster youth, and that would meet the state requirement. This is alarming and scary. We would like to echo what my colleagues have mentioned about supporting the districts and having a specialized foster care unit to help guide the counselors, and then also a state guidance on data sharing, because this is an important attribute of LCFF. And how are the districts going to identify the foster youth in a sensitive and confidential manner, but in a way that these foster youth receive the programs and assistance that they deserve. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. My name is Marta Alvarez at San Diego Unified School District. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments. I'll highlight mostly on LCFF. We're still evaluating the LAO recommendations for the transportation changes, and we're also still having an evaluation of the governor's continuous appropriation. So I'll highlight just on LCFF implementation, given we're the second largest school district in the state. We're very excited about the opportunity afforded by LCFF and the LCAP template. We at our district now pass this one brochure. In 2009, our Board of Education was very visionary and adopted what you'll see in front of you. It's a 2009 plan focusing on Vision 2020. So at that time, our students were in first grade and they would be graduating in the class of 2020. We were focusing on quality schools in every neighborhood, 12 quality indicators of what a good school looks like. So in talking to our communities, I was in San Diego last night at our community forum with more than 200 people. We're asking them what kind of schools do they want? What are we doing well right now? What can we do, improve on or do better to have kids engaged in schools? And also, how can we collaborate and work together? So we're already doing that work at our second largest school district in the state. I think part of the focus will be on really aligning those priorities, goals, and services with how we're spending the money, and we hope to do that. I just want to point out that LCFF, it is hopefully in over an 8-year time frame, hopefully sooner than that, but that the expectations of how we get to achieving those 8 priorities needs to be aligned with how much money we're receiving. So it should be proportionate to how much we're receiving. In 13-14, we only received 12% of that gap funding. 14-15 is proposed to be 28% of that gap funding. So we will be continuing to work towards getting those goals met for the 8 state priorities. We're working with our communities and determining that. I think it is exciting for us at San Diego Unified to focus on the 3-year LCAP. What can we do with what we have in 14-15, and how can we we build upon for the next 2 years. You asked for some examples of what will districts maybe be doing with the new funding that we get from LCFF. Well, I can tell you, like some of the panel members mentioned, we cannot tell you concretely right now what we'll be doing and using the money for because we're currently in the process of engaging the communities. But at San Diego Unified, we are thinking maybe about class size reduction for the early grades. That has been something that community has really expressed interest in. So for the low-performing schools, we'll be 24-1, and then for those schools in the other across the district would be brought from 27-1 to about 25.1 for 14-15. As many schools across the state, we were operating under 175 school days a year. We hope that we'll be able to restore a whole week of school in 14-15. That's 5 days that we had eliminated from the calendar year. That will help all of our students across the district, including the low-performing and unduplicated students. And then on the middle grades, we will be focusing on the long-term English learners. We have more than 7,000 long-term ELs in San Diego Unified. So we want to talk about, can we have coaches, maybe instructional aides? What can we do for those students to close the achievement gap? And then lastly, at the high school, we'll be focusing on graduation rates, dropout rates. Also, how can we have, focusing on college and career for all of those students. So really close, focusing on the achievement gap. I'll just mention two last points. We're talking about LCFF implementation and also LCFF funding. Something that I know you and Assemblymember Ting mentioned was the concern of the supplemental concentration grant not reaching those targeted students. That's a legitimate concern and should be continue to be discussed. Something I want to put forth is that concern that those kids will not get the money from the state that they may be eligible for. So under LCFF, school districts are being required to collect alternate forms to certify that those kids exist. So we have to go out and get those forms back. In our experience, in terms of funding, we are concerned school districts, not just San Diego, but across the state. We will not be able to collect those alternate forms back for those eligible free and reduced lunch students because, there's a stigma associated with being low income. So that's more of a conversation for ongoing. Do we really have to collect those forms every year, or can there be an alternative to do it every 2 to 4 years? We look forward to the discussion, and it's really exciting to be doing LCFF at the time that we're also changing Common Core and what we teach and how we teach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and staff. Moira Top here on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association. We wanted to offer our support for the LEO recommendations regarding home-to-school transportation program. Charter schools didn't exist in 1980 when that formula was locked down. Charter schools are just like traditional schools in the sense that they have varying degrees of need and resources to transport their students. And we do think it's an important and ripe time to have that dialogue, to roll those dollars into the LCFF formula, and we would like to continue the dialogue and work with you to find an equitable solution. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, staff. My name is Kirk Hunter. I'm CEO Emeritus of Southwest Transportation Agency, one of the 8 JPAs in the state that provides transportation services and is directly funded. Our JPA is located in Fresno County. Our free and reduced lunch percentage combined is 85% of the 20,000 students we transport. I wanted to put a little context to transportation funding. We support option 3 from the LIO with a minor modification that I'll get to. In 1988, when the agency began, we were funded at 75% from the state. Today we're at 35%. And when we talk about efficiencies and reimbursing only at 50% to achieve or urge efficiencies, the agency's budget, our payroll and benefits to budget is only 53%. You don't get much more efficient than that. Efficiencies have had to come if you want to keep buses on the road and get kids to school. The only thing I would recommend in the LAO's report is option 3 at 85% as opposed to 50%, so that we can have a robust transportation system. Right on a California school bus is safer than any other school bus in the nation, and there's a reason for that. It's because of the dedication training, and we need funding to keep that up. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm your last speaker. Yay. Mr. Chair, Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. Again, really appreciate the focus on accountability, the fiscal accountability in LCFF. Public Advocates and our community partners were strong and early supporters of LCFF, and we've been really grateful to be brought in, actually embraced as stakeholders in the development of regulations and guidance and whatnot by the state board staff and the department staff. And it's true that transparency is indeed much better for local communities. And we're very happy that in the emergency regs there is some consistent methodology in determining the formula by which services must be improved or increased for unduplicated students. But now it's more important as we start out on this first year of implementation, and before we get too far into it, to really be able to see, or in order for you as the legislature to meet your constitutional obligation to oversee education, you do need to track supplemental and concentration dollars, and you won't be able to. The State Board of Ed regulations don't do that, and the statute doesn't require it. And as a result of that, business officials in districts and counties are being told they don't have to track it either, even though they're actually alarmed by that decision. So I recommend that, we recommend that you do that. Otherwise, it'll get away from us, and we really won't be able to hold anybody accountable for that, even in an audit process. In terms of the emergency regs, the ability to keep track of supplemental and concentration is still not tight enough. We are advocating for, and we encourage you also to look closely at what we believe is a loophole in the emergency regs, which allows districts to use supplemental and concentration funding district-wide and school-wide, even for districts that are above, that reach the 55% concentration. That's still 45% of students who are not unduplicated. And we believe that districts should make a much stronger showing that the funds they're using district-wide are principally targeting the needs of unduplicated students, and that the strategies they're adopting for that are effective in meeting those students. As you heard, and you will continue to hear, that districts are facing the pressures of backfilling of deficit budgets and restoring cuts that have been made. It will be very important to be able to track how these funds are being used so that those pressures are not overcoming your intent. While some of these superintendents said they were housing away supplemental and concentration, some districts are not doing that. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, this meeting is adjourned.